All right. I've got a spare one if you
Okay, guys, we ready? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting, the Vale Whitehorse District Council Scrutiny Meeting Committee. My name is Catherine Foxhall, and I'm chairing this meeting with my Vice Chair, Judy Roberts, next to me. And we have officers from the senior management team and Candida Basilio from Democratic Services in support. This meeting is being held in Abbey House, Abingdon. Voting members of this committee are here in person as required, and we have people in the room and joining remotely. This meeting is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel later for the public to view. So if those of you who are online could keep your microphones muted while not speaking, but please do raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Everybody here, I believe, knows the evacuation procedure. Round to the right, through the door and into the car park. We only have one substantial item this evening, so I propose we power right through. Please keep mobile phones silent or off. And at the end of the meeting, we'll confirm that the recording has ended. And then please remember to sign out as you leave. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, but we don't have any registered speakers now this evening, I believe. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending, and we will crack on. So item 1 is Chair's announcements. I don't have any particular announcements as the Chair this evening. We just have one main item of business this evening, which is the revenue budget and capital programme for 2026-2027. Item 2, I have apologies for absence from Robert Madison and James Cox, and also to note that Councillor Sue Core, who was a member of this committee, has resigned as a councillor. So we will look forward to a replacement in due course. Item 3 minutes of the last meeting, that was the meeting held on the 3rd of November, which is when we discussed our planning enforcement update. Has everybody had a chance to look at those minutes? Is everybody content that they are an accurate record of that meeting? I should please have a proposer and a seconder. Judy, thank you. Ron, thank you. And I will sign those at the end then, thank you. Declarations of interest. Committee members, do you have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests, or non-registrable interests, or any conflicts of interest in respect of items on the agenda this evening? Nope. Thank you very much. I don't have any urgent business under 5. Just lost my document. As I mentioned just now, item 6, we don't have anybody registered to speak now. We did have one speaker, but they've dropped out due to illness. So item 7, work schedule and dates for Vale and joint scrutiny meetings. Does anybody have any comments on the work programme or any questions? No? All right. Obviously, if you do at any point, do get in touch with Candida or myself. Item 8 is update on recommendations from previous Vale scrutiny meetings. Our recommendations from the last meeting regarding planning enforcement were noted at the last Cabinet meeting, so thank you to the Cabinet for looking at those. I would also like to remind members of the committee that we do have a tracker to keep an eye on what we've discussed and what the results of that would be. If there are any questions, please do let Candida know, but I'd like to thank Candida for setting that up and for the work involved in keeping that all up to date. That's a really great help, and it's something we've been wanting to do better for a while, so thank you very much. All right, so without further ado, we can move on to item 9, which is revenue budget 2026-27 and capital programme 2026-27 to 2030 to 2031. I'm really pleased to welcome our Head of Finance, Simon Hewings, to join us this evening, and our Cabinet, Councillor Mark Coleman. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Councillor Coleman, would you like to introduce this item?
Well, I think we've already had an hour-long introduction in the members' briefing, so if the chair's happy, then I should just open up to hand it back to you, because I don't think there's anything he's introducing, and I can't say anything that's not already been said.
Okay. The only thing I would say was that was a private briefing for members, and this is a publicly recorded meeting. But if you're happy to just open up to comments or to pass over to Simon, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I can say so the budget process then in broad order is the officers will go through the baseline setting, where they conduct their own review of current programmes and expenditure. That then comes to cabinet members. So I'm talking about the revenue programme, really, revenue budget. Comes to cabinet members, where we have a member challenge, where we go through and ask, why is this particular line in? Is it sufficient? Is there too much? Is there another way of doing it? That then sets the baseline setting. From that, then we will look at discretionary growth. So there will be an element of essential growth, which is generally salaries and associated pay, so pensions, etc., national insurance. But the discretionary growth then is the bits that we want to do as new business. There are 3 new growth bids that are in there. One is ongoing, which is for basically supports our nature action plan. We previously paid £2,000 a year into the local wildlife program, LWP program, I think it is. And in order for us really to contribute anything really meaningful now, we need to increase that to £10,000 per year ongoing. So that's an increase of 8,000 as an ongoing growth bid. There is one other bid for economic development. We previously had government grants that funded some posts. Those grants are no longer available, but we wish to continue the work that the economic development team is doing in that area. So for year 1, which is 26-27, it's 25,000, and for the following year it goes to £15,000, and then stops effectively, because that would be when we go into local government reorganisation. And the third growth bid is for a motion that the council in December passed for community cohesion. £25,000. We put it as a one-off growth because that funding will effectively put in an action plan plus some initial focus groups for so that we can see the sort of thing that we could do for future. And then we're expecting community officers to come back to us with any proposal for putting into the following years. So it's not something we think is just going to be all done in 1 year, but this effectively gives us the funding to get going. On the capital side, very similar sort of process. So we go through all the capital programme to determine, are the things still realistic? Are they is it the right order of priority of activities? And are there any new activities that one must be done? So it might be, for example, if there's a health and safety report on a play park, that we might need to put more money into the parks. And then there's the discretionary growth. There are 8 discretionary growths which are associated with the extension of the leisure contract. So in agreeing the contract, we agreed that we would do some capital works in our leisure centres. The company GLL won't do that. So those they are discretionary in the sense that we could have excluded from the contract, but we want to include them to get the contract over the line. There is £100,000 for a BMX park at Barrow Hills. The park, it belongs to the Vale. It became into disrepair and was vandalised, and requires, if we are going to use it, basically for it to be redone fully. So there's £100,000 going to that. The Wantage Splash has got some extra money in it to bring that to do some work there, again as discretionary growth. And I think those are all the discretionary growths. I mean, the key thing really for the budget we put together, we have to balance the budget. I say we, actually, I don't. Simon does, the Section 151 officer, has to produce a balanced budget for year one, which is year 26-27. But we do put together a 5-year medium-term financial plan, which you'll see in your paperwork at Appendix F. And in that, you will note that with the income that we receive from the government and council tax and the expenditure that we're expecting, there is a shortfall that in year one is to the tune of about 5% of our reserves, which we can fund. The reserve, we put our own, if you like, fiscal rule that we would not spend more than 10% of the reserves to ensure we've got sustainability. If you then look into years 2, 3, 4, and 5, you will find that those figures go up 13%, 18%, 21%, etc. So at the moment, those they don't have to balance, but we would not wish to see that that expenditure, that level of expenditure or loss from reserves. So for next year, there's a considerable amount of work to work out how do we get that use of reserves down. That either means increase revenue, or it could be find efficiencies in the way we deliver services, or that we don't do some services. Obviously, the latter would be our last choice.
Thank you very much. Great. Simon, have you got anything you wanted to add?
Nothing at this stage.
Perfect. Committee members, do you have any questions that you want to kick off with?
Just got one about the local government reorganisation costs.
Yeah.
How, I think for the public to see that we're ring-fencing 3 million is quite, a lot of money, and that could be spent on public services, and it's just on admin. Could you perhaps elaborate on why we need to ring-fence that and why 3 million?
Yeah, but basically because the government has decided that we are going to go through local government reorganisation, it will come at a cost. And depending on which of the options the government decides that we're going to go with, which is single unitary, 2 unitary, or 3 unitary, the costs vary. So that estimate of 3 million is an estimate of what we think it will cost us, our contribution in terms of setting up officer work, allocating to work through transition. So county council will set aside some money, and the other district councils will need to fund their contribution. We think that our contribution would be up to £3 million.
Can I just chip in terms of the submissions that were made to government? The transition costs, from memory, were in the order of 25 to 30 million. For all of the options are in that sort of range. So, in that context, this council share would be 10% of that total. Obviously, those estimates are just subject to further work, as we know what the actual solution will be.
Are we likely to get any funding from the government for this?
We don't know at this stage. They did provide some funding towards the first stage, and they could well provide some funding towards the next stage. And clearly, depending on what the outcome of that is, we'll discover whether our estimate is too high or too low.
We should probably also add that each of those options brings with it some savings. So yes, we have to pay up the upfront costs, but there are savings over, and it varies as to how many years, as to what the savings will be. So yeah, we will recover the funding.
Thank you.
Right. This is something I ought to have picked up earlier, I think. In Appendix D1, the Section 106 figures, it looks a bit odd that there's 27-28 is 171,000. Then it goes up to 1.2 million, and then back to 171,000. I wondered what. It just looks a bit a strange figure.
Sorry, which
Appendix D1.
Yeah.
Capital financing.
Yeah.
Section 106 budgets for the future. 28-29 seems to be 1.2 million in 28-29.
I see what you're saying, yeah. So 2.9 million, then 171,000, 1.2 million. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes.
That will be in respect of a specific scheme. I'm just trying to see if I can spot it. It will be in respect of the contribution to South Oxfordshire for Didcot Wave that's in. So if you look on page 30, it stands out as the biggest number in that third column. I just managed to lose the page now. Yeah, so about halfway, 2/3 of the way down the page, if you look in the 28-29 column, there's 1048 against that line contributions to Didcot Wave. That was a decision agreed a couple of years ago, because it's in respect of contributions I think earned in Great Western Park, which of course straddles both sides of the both south and down.
So why is Didcot Wave? Couldn't we push that project earlier?
That was based on the work that was done. We talked about earlier on in terms of profiling, making sure the capital program's in the right year. That's when it's expected to take place.
Okay, just looked a bit odd. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I had a question on the extended producer responsibility income that we received. So it's a very valuable addition to our revenues. But what assumptions are made about the payment? How might it change in the years to come? So it's a three-parter. And is there an indication that producers are likely to start implementing their own buyback schemes, and therefore we get less money, but we still pay for we still have the same number of waste trucks collecting a smaller tonnage? So it seems like there's a risk that we could end up underfunded and having to spend the same amount.
So
it might be a long-term risk which we may never face.
So the EPR effectively, if you like, is to compensate councils for the cost of recovering the recycle.
Yeah.
The producers, because they're paying it, should be reducing their packaging, which of course is what we actually want to happen.
Yes.
Whether they're going to be able to reduce it sufficiently such that it becomes that we've got trucks that are not picking stuff up, I very much doubt. That's not going to happen. But I think it will happen that we might not be, we will not be, hopefully will not be recovering as much recycle, and therefore that funding will likely go down. Yes. So at the moment we fund it for at the rate of inflation. We're assuming the government is assuming. However, if I was about to say by some miracle, hopefully it's not a miracle. It's just good work on behalf of the producers. They reduce the packaging significantly. Then yes, that income would go down.
And how sensitive would our finances be to that, or is it not that significant?
Certainly. I mean, in the context of next year, I mean, I think we are guaranteed that figure from government. Okay. I don't think they're guaranteed the numbers beyond that, but certainly the original estimate they gave us for the current financial year, they eventually upped quite significantly, and then they've added inflation to that upped figure. So I think as it stands at the moment, as Councillor Coleman has said, we have put that current year figure plus inflation. My suspicion is that for the next 2 or 3 years, I suspect that's probably a fairly safe assumption. Beyond that, I don't know. At the moment, we are talking a figure of 1.6 million. I'm just looking at the third year of the MTFP. It's 1.656 million. We're going to get, clearly if there's a 10% reduction in that, that's 160,000 or so. So it's at that level of significance, really.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask, if I may, about our use of reserves this year and looking at that going forward, and particularly to put that in the context of LGR and local government reorganisation and the kind of merging of this council with an as yet undecided future unitary authority. So two parts really is we're talking about at the moment this year we're using about 5% of reserves which are deemed to be sustainable. You've mentioned this kind of figure of 10% as if that's your kind of maximum use of reserves per year, and I'm interested in where does that figure come from? Is that a kind of common figure used across councils? Where does that kind of come from? And then looking forward the next few years, the use of the percentage of the reserves that we're likely to use goes far beyond that 10%. And I'm interested in, I know we're not allowed to make decisions that tie the hands of any future authority, but we are effectively going to be handing a package where the hands are tied because of the final financial situation. It's none of this is frivolous spending. We've kind of talked about bare bones as there's no meat left to chop it, as it were. And particularly in the event that we end up in a unitary with West Berkshire and South Oxfordshire, there's definitely no kind of wiggle room. So I'm just interested in what work's being done to look at that package going forward, and what work are officers and senior leaders doing to kind of plan for those eventualities, because it's obviously in the interest of our residents over the medium and long term. That problem of financial sustainability is not going to go away with the new unitary. So two big questions.
So I'll start with the 10%. So looking around the room, I don't think too many of you were here about 4 or 5 years ago when we set budgets during COVID. So when it was quite a challenge, for all sorts of reasons, it was a challenging time, but amongst other things, it was challenging due to the budget position. We lost a lot of income from our income streams, for example. So I think both South and Vale, we set budgets using the order of 2 to 3 million of reserves, I think, at each council to balance the budget. And that triggered the interest of our external auditor at the time, in the context of, are you setting a budget that, are you meeting your value for money objectives to set a balanced budget, use money sustainably? And I think myself and the previous chief exec reflected on that at length to come up with what would they be okay with in that sense, because we'd obviously gone too far in what we were doing in those years, and for fair reasons. I think they wouldn't disagree that the reasons were unfair, but what they did in that scenario is they made sure the Joint Audit Governance Committee were aware that something needed to be done. You couldn't keep doing that. So that's where the 10% came from, really, because I think that keeps us, if I think about the level of reserves we had at the time, we were over 10% in terms of making those decisions. So that's where it sort of comes from, really. I think it's defendable. If you had because clearly as you use your reserves, they go down. But if you were to stay within 10%, if your MTFP had less than 10% in every year, you'd still have a pretty healthy amount of reserves left at the end. What you don't have, obviously, in the scenario here is by the time you get to the last year, there's only 2 or 3 years worth of reserves left if you carry on that trajectory. So I suppose, and I'll start on the LGR question, and I'll let Councillor Coleman sort of add some colour, shall we say. I think the first observation I'll probably make on LGR is we won't be alone. Your question will be asked sort of down the country in lots of councils at the moment in this very situation. Clearly, LGR of itself is designed to it's designed to generate efficiencies, bring economies of scale, and of itself alleviate some of the financial problems that councils are facing. Clearly, what I would say to that is subject to proper funding level being made available. I think in the context of it, we always think of obviously South and Vale joining with West Berkshire in the 2 unitary model, but of course it also joins with Oxfordshire. So Oxfordshire's dismembered, and probably 40% or so, there or thereabouts, of sort of the county's assets and liabilities, reserves would come to South and Vale and West Berkshire. And in the context of the consultancy work that was done to support the 2UA model, the PwC work showed that you would create 2 sustainable unitaries out of all that combination. You add them all together. And I think it's probably fair to reflect that West Berkshire's problems are problems of scale. not of poor management or administration. They're very small. So I think in that perspective, that we are creating sustainable unitary, the analysis suggests we are creating more sustainable unitaries than the component parts that are going into them. The point about services is well made. I mean, the challenge for next year, say, is what we clearly don't want to do is cut services that are a priority for the authority that comes after us. And I think that's worth understanding. We need to understand that. If we get the LGR decision and we know who we're pairing off with, and we start to end up, and again, an understanding of what those priorities are, we can start framing the decisions we need to take next year in that context. Does that help?
Yes, that does a lot, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, the only other thing I would say is we got a very late settlement this year. So I mean, this year was the 15th of December, the week before, technically the week before Christmas, people breaking up. So whilst we were able to do the work that with focuses on year 1, 26, 27, there is more work to be done on 27, 28. So if we'd had that settlement earlier, those figures might be able to have been adjusted more. I don't know, but we didn't have the time to do that. Again, quite right, you would expect us to focus on year 1. So that was an issue. The other element that we will have to do is look at where do we make our treasury decisions on what appetite might we wish to take on increasing risk for some of our investments, for example, such that the revenue comes as income from the government, from council tax, but it also does come from our investments, which is quite considerable. I think it was 100 million was what we said earlier on. So whilst we were able to balance the budget within our set fiscal rules, we didn't need to take as much risk. Now we might be needing to say, okay, do we need to take that risk in order to? And when I say risk, I mean I don't see it as being failure. I just think there was no requirement to be more, have more appetite for taking risk on the investments. So yeah, it's not comfortable looking, and we definitely should not be looking at this and saying, well, that's LGR's problem. It's not. It's our problem, because one, LGR might not go ahead. It might delay. We have to hand over something that's viable.
I just want to follow up quickly, because you mentioned subject to government funding, and we did talk about this in the briefing earlier, but I think it's worth coming back to again. Is Simon, particularly, what do you think government are receptive? You said that you've been repeatedly kind of saying to government that local authorities need to be funded properly, and I think that's something we absolutely all agree with. Do you think the government are receptive, or are you talking to a brick wall?
I think first of all, clearly the government's got a lot of funding priorities, which local government is one. I think the one that frustrates me is the approach to council tax, because we are effectively capped, and I think it's one thing being capped if you're in the top 15 council tax charging councils in the authority, but we're in the bottom 15 council tax charging authorities in the country. And the crude maths is if we could charge at the average, we'd be putting money into reserves this next year, not taking money out. And I think that's the bit that I find really challenging. And it's something the previous government introduced, and this government seems determined to continue it. So that's my frustration. The funding ones is more complex. You will never. I don't think the size of the pot's big enough. The only way the pot would become big enough is probably through increased taxation or cuts somewhere else. Or where would you take the money from? That's not going to be popular. So I think that the pot will never be big enough. Whichever government's in power. But it's the character. So as much as I'm banging my head against a brick wall, I kind of accept that with that one. It's the council tax one where I just think it's just unfair and illogical to me.
I mean, the title of the work was fair funding, and I think I would call it unfair funding. But that's because we're on the back end of what's left. So the government has put its priorities on areas of deprivation. But what I would say as a predominantly rural council, we don't have large areas of deprivation, but it does still cost us money to go and deliver the services we have. So, for example, getting the waste trucks out, whereas it probably doesn't cost us any more in a deprived urban area to do waste collection than it does for us. But the government has taken away that if you like, weighting towards us. So I think that bit's the unfair bit, and I also agree with Simon that we should be able to put the council tax up higher in order to deliver the services that people require, or at least have the opportunity to. Sorry, that doesn't mean we're going to do it, but we should have that option to do so.
Thank you.
Sorry, and the government assumes that we're going to put it up at the maximum.
Yes.
So that's the bit I think that makes it unfair. They're making the assumption of that, but they don't top up the extra bit.
And the reason ours is low is because of historic decisions that have been made not to put council tax.
Well, there were years where there was actually no council tax increase whatsoever, and so you can never catch that up again because you're working at this percentage. Although I can't remember which year it is, year 3, I think, isn't it? That we actually can. So you either put it up by the percentage or up by a monetary value, whichever is the highest. For us, at the moment, it's £5, which is the higher level. But eventually we'll get to being that we can put it up by a percentage, but it still doesn't bring in sufficient money.
Thank you both.
Okay. I've got quite a few questions, but the reset of business rates, I was around when they were reset shortly before the closure of the plant. And it took us several years to get any kind of business rates beyond that, because I can remember several budgets sequentially where we were underneath the ceiling and we clawed back to having 0. So where does the 50,000 come from that you think we'll still get, having had the base rates? Do you want all my questions, or?
I'll just do one at a time. I'll forget them otherwise. I mean, that one is just purely speculative. We're in an area where we have, to almost back up what you just said there. If I think back to how far below the safety net Vale was,
Yes.
And in that time, that baseline has not been reset, and we clawed our way back up to be above, safety net and eventually above baseline. So I think of all areas in the country, this would be an area where you'd expect to see at least some form of business rates growth. We won't know until probably Christmas time, I would think, how we're doing against that number. We've got to wait for some more data collections and review by government in terms of the basis of our numbers in the settlement. I mean, the baseline figure itself won't change, but it's how they calculate the tariff has got to be reviewed, and they won't give us the correct tariff, the actual tariff number until much later in the year. So we won't know until much later in the year how we're doing on that. The one thing we can't do is go below the 2.9 million figure they've given us, because they've guaranteed us 100% safety net this year. So we can't go low. The only money that's at risk is that 50,000.
Because we have got 2 EZ zones, and that's where a lot of our business rates come from, and we don't get any of that.
Industry, yeah, lots of growth to go in there. But even with that, Vale was still able to claw its way back up to be above baseline previously.
That one. On the council tax, yes, we are being forced to put it up to the full amount, but also we have a problem on collection, well, not collection of council tax, but the fact that they haven't been bandy rated. Has that had any consequence is that the fact that we have 2,000 homes that have not been band rated yet, is that in the amount in the budget that we're not going to be getting that because they've not been band rated? We're effectively waiting on government to make up their mind, or is that not in the budget? Is that a risk?
So this is the issue that the BOA has a significant backlog in banding properties. So when you have a new property, can't charge anyone council tax until it's been banded correctly. And there's a significant backlog. So in the context of the council tax base, because we take the actual number of banded properties at the point at which we calculate the tax base, that backlog is we haven't made any allowance for extra properties should the backlog be cleared. So in that sense, the tax base is lower than we know it is. We also then have the collection fund surplus. Now that's where we have taken a calculated, probably risk is too strong, but we've done a calculation on how many properties we think the VOA will band during the year. So we factored that into the surplus calculation. So we think the surplus calculation is on track. And even if it isn't on track, they will be banded one day, he says, touching wood. But the reality is they will have to be banded. So it will catch up eventually. Now, the plus side is we might see an uptick in tax base next year compared to what the forecast is. We have carried on with our forecast increase in tax base we've had previously, which is quite optimistic in terms of growth. So I'm not anticipating that the budget is immaterially correct for the VOA problem, but the VOA problem did factor into our thinking in making sure that we got the budget right.
And does it have consequences? I mean, we still have to provide things like waste services. So is that come out of our costs for providing those, if you like, invisible properties have actually come out of our budget for waste and things?
Yeah, so we'll have to carry on providing services to those households who aren't paying. But of course, at the point at which they are banded, it's backdated to the day they entered the property. So, I mean, that then, and we've started to see it already, that then causes its own challenge when suddenly someone's presented with 24 months of council tax bill. It doesn't, it's not a good message, and that causes its own problems and challenges. And Mark will know this with his corporate services hat on. Who's to blame for that? Well, it isn't us, even though we're the people sending you the bill.
But what I would say is that revenue benefits do work with residents to help them, so they can set up like a holding account, so they can actually, you can kind of predict what band it's going to be, so they can start putting money away either with us in a I'm going to call it a holding account. I can't remember what we probably call it, or recommend that they do so in their own savings accounts. So they're not, it shouldn't come as a surprise after 2 years. And we're trying to work with people to let them know that it is coming.
And this level is significantly higher than we've had before, isn't it?
I think the delays is between 3 and 6 months now.
Yeah. And the question on LGR I had was West Berkshire have already been taking out, it's not ESP, but they have had special extra something finance, haven't they? Yes.
Exceptional financial support.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then now we are going to be in our forward going budget doing borrowing, admittedly against cash reserves. Was all this data in the financial proposal breakdown? Because I noticed in the 2 unitaries breakdown, we were going to be making vast turnaround transition savings within the second year and the third year. So was all that data fed into that account, or is this new data that's come after that work was done?
If anything, the MTFP that the 2 unitary proposal was based on, it was probably in a worse position than the one we've got here. If you look back to the MTFP that was set last year, I think we were supposed to be using 2.8 million of reserves this year to balance the budget, and we're clearly using far less than that because we thought we would lose money under the fair funding year, and in fact we didn't. So we're in a better position than we were. So certainly from the Vale's perspective, the numbers in that proposal the numbers in this budget are probably better than the one that went in the proposal.
Even though it's a 3-year settlement and it will be good for those 3 years.
Yeah, because we thought we would lose money. Basically, we thought we'd be 600,000 worse off. So if you assume that council tax and government grant funding stay the same, was the sort of, if you're on the floor, if you like, so if you're no better or no worse, you add your council tax and your government grant fund together, you get the same number, and you put that across the MTFP. What we did for Vale last year is we took 600 grand cumulative off that over the 3 years. We took 600 grand off in year 1, 1.2 million off in year 2, and 1.8 million off in year 3. Because we haven't had to do any of that, so we're in a much better place than we were.
And just one very small local one. This Forster Road, Forster Lane, is in the budget
It
to
is,
be
yeah,
resurfaced.
In capital.
I only mention it because when I was elected in 2007, Forster Lane was proposed to be resurfaced,
Yeah.
and it hasn't been.
No, it
And I
is.
was wondering if it
Sorry,
actually
I
is
apologise.
finally
That's
going to be
one of the
resurfaced.
roads I couldn't remember the name of, but yes, it is in there. Yeah.
It is finally going to be resurfaced.
Well, depending on
thank you
whether
from
this
the residents.
depends on whether this gets
I was going to say if it gets through, yes.
gets through. Yeah.
But yes, if you've ever gone down Forster Lane, you would
Seen it.
understand why.
No, I've seen it. Yeah.
It is really quite challenging to get any vehicle down there. So, and it is where people live. It is their front doors. So, thank you. I think I've just had for that one. That's it for me.
Yeah, note 51 talks about the main options open to councils facing budget gaps and lists 5 things. The first of all being things one would try and do, presumably called cutting services and things. I imagine these activities such as ensuring budgets are accurate, looking to provide services more efficiently, ensuring to maximise, identifying new income streams are things that are generally happening all the time to some extent. But I wonder if you could just provide a bit of a description of the perhaps opportunity and expectation for savings in these areas as they stand right now. I appreciate probably a bit speculative, but it'd be interesting to understand.
Yeah, I'd be cautious about saying what savings we'd be looking, because well, one, we haven't gone into any level of detail of looking at, and two, that would probably be about staff. And if we start talking about making savings on staff, then that sets the hairs running needlessly, because we might not be considering it. So if I've understood your question correctly, you're saying what savings might we be looking at making now?
Perhaps I shouldn't use the word savings. It's just a bit of context around note 51 really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we've spent a lot of time in recent years on item 1 under that. You know, the budgets are accurate as possible, eliminating over budgeting and for expenditure and the budgeting thing. We've done a lot of work on that. I think looking to provide services more efficiently, that's on 2 levels. I mean, there have been significant projects looking at certain areas. So, for example, at the moment we're implementing a new planning system, and that came following a review by the Planning Advisory Service. But there are other areas, so there'll be areas in teams. For example, someone's retired or left, and the team form a view that actually we can cope without getting a replacement. So that'd be that sort of situation there. We've done a lot of work on income streams in recent years to make sure we're getting full cost recovery, because that's what we're allowed to do. I think it's probably fair to say lots of councils in the last decade looking for new income streams to an extreme, and probably caught a cold on some of them. So I think there's probably no appetite for necessarily looking at new ones, particularly the sort of the wilder and wackier end of the spectrum. But there are potentially areas we can look at within existing services that don't do that. They probably involve more of a they don't necessarily come along without people thinking about them and bringing them through a proper governance route to assess them. And obviously cutting services would be a major corporate-wide exercise that would be led by SFT members. So hopefully that gives you a flavour. I mean, I think I'd agree with you. What 1, 2 and 3 should be being done as a matter of course anyway. But we take the opportunity through budget setting to make sure they happen. 4 and 5 would be more structured.
Thank you.
If I may, there is quite a live example that I'm involved in, which is customer services. Last year, you recall we introduced garden waste permits, and that did a number of things. My customer services team are forever chasing failed direct debits with residents because they'd moved, they'd changed their bank details. By introducing the permit scheme last year, we were more efficient in terms of staff time. We also, I think, found some customers who weren't paying as well, so that increased the income levels on there. but freeing up the staff time in customer services enabled us to take more calls for other teams. So the elections team are busy at certain times in the year, and we were able to take calls off them as well. So by doing that sort of process change, it improves efficiencies across the business as well as increasing income, which I know when Councillor Common was a portfolio holder, he was quite pleased to see last year as well. So all of those sort of interlinked things are things that are ongoing all the time. So I'm forever looking in my service areas thinking, okay, what can we do differently here that's going to make a difference on there to not increase costs, but trying to hold the costs as where they are as worst case scenario, but try and reduce them as well going forward. So those are live examples from my area.
And I've just recalled that I went through some of the budget setting process, but it was in the training. So maybe if Chair's happy, I might just repeat it for here. So the officers will start to do their work on baseline setting, i.e. how much does it actually cost to do what we're doing now, forget thinking about what we're going to be doing in the future, but actual costs. So that'll be led by the head of services. That then goes to the other officers to then do an officer challenge on that. So they will look and say, okay, justify why you need X amount for some advertising, say, for example. Once that's been done, it then comes to the cabinet members. So we have a members challenge session, which is actually quite rigorous. And I think I would say that if you like, it holds everybody to account, because we will be digging in, and once you start seeing something, say, well, actually, I don't understand that. Can you explain that for me? Now, there's obviously an economy of effort. You don't want to be chasing after pennies when there's pounds over here that are not being looked after. But what it does is it brings a fresh pair of eyes. And I think sometimes when trying to get the officers to explain something that we don't understand the technical detail of why they're doing something, it does give them the opportunity of rethinking, maybe, is there a different way of doing so? So that's the baseline setting. And then we look at, okay, what other things are there that we need to do? So now we've got essential growth salaries, for example, and then the discretionary growth, which is what are the things that we feel that we need to do or we would like to do, and then how do we get that to balance? So that's broadly the process. It starts in about September. Well, that's when I start getting visibility, but probably officers are working on it a bit longer than that. And then we get through to February when the budget is presented to council.
Just have a couple of questions about practically where we are or not spending money. Firstly, I think we have an additional pot of money that's coming from central government for homelessness and domestic abuse, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about how you're anticipating spending that, because I think that's something that does represent very good value for money in the work we already do. So I'd be really interested to hear more about that. But also, could you talk a little bit more about what has gone from the capital programme, please? Because it's difficult to compare like for like over previous years. I was trying to do that earlier and got in a muddle, but
I'll do the
there are some elements that have gone, and obviously they previously were desirable and now they're not. Thank you.
So the most significant piece that's gone from the capital programme was reworking on the clay course at the lawn tennis, the Wantage Tennis Club, Whitehall, sorry, where they've been becoming disuse. They were going to be resurfaced to become for paddleboard or such like, £400,000. However, there didn't seem to be a huge amount of appetite, no serious demand for that. So we decided that we would take that 400,000, and that's what's funding predominantly the 480,000 that comes with the works for the leisure centres for the contract changeover. So, I mean, that's really what the major change has been. And Simon did say, we have now spent, or we've committed, not committed in the sense of contractually, but we have now accounted for all of the SIL funding, but actually a little bit over as well. So if you look at that line, it's £20,000. If it all came in, now we know historically capital programmes don't always come in either in the year or at that cost. So 20,000 is something that we can accept as a risk.
On the homelessness prevention grant, as has already been alluded to, I mean, we only found out just before Christmas that what was going to happen with that. So what we've done effectively at the moment is we've put the extra income in the budget and just put in a notional expenditure against it, because as I said earlier on, it's a ring fence grant. So what we don't spend, we'll have to pay back. So clearly we intend to spend it. How we will spend the extra is still up for discussion. So in the first instance, the head of housing will prepare a paper for SMT College to discuss to begin with on how we will spend that extra money, and then that will come forward for proper decision in due course.
And could that include things like buying more houses for temporary accommodation, or does it need to go on like employing staff, supporting services, that kind of thing?
I mean, the sum of money involved. I mean, you probably might get one house out of it in that context. I think there are potentially some existing work that's being done that's currently, being charged to general funds that could be paid for out of that, noting in particular sort of Vale's financial situation. Some of that money could actually help fund some of the stuff that are currently or projects that are already being funded, and that will help Vale's situation. But yeah, it's still to be determined, really.
Okay. Thank you very much. Committee members have any other questions?
One query. In the capital spend, there's things on the White Horse Leisure and Tennis Centre, 3 items for facilities there. There's a one-off and funded by South. I just wondered why South was funding the White Horse Leisure and Tennis Centre. Page, it's Appendix E, D3, page 41. I can see the joint grass cutting machines because they cut grass in both places.
On fees and charges.
Capital growth bids.
Oh,
I'm on
page
41 to the bottom.
Not that I'm objecting, it's very kind of them. I just wasn't quite sure of the logic behind it.
Oh, that's just a typo. I think it should say Vale in there. That's a typo. I'll double check that. Yeah, that should say Vale in those 3 lines.
So they're not being that generous, that's a shame.
No, sorry about that.
Okay.
Helping out there forecasting.
Yeah, page 30, the capital programme, there's quite a few lines with 0 across the whole line. Can I suggest we take those out?
Yeah, I mean these things move until the last minute. So yeah, there are those lines we'll get a tidied up version.
Just, there's things like flooding that it says we've spent no money on that. Well, we all know that this is an accounting document, but the general public will look at that and go, well, we should be, and the climate bit as well. I think it's A0. And it's just, it's drawing attention to the fact that.
That's understood and noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So committee, we're being asked to, let me come back to the recommendation at the top. We are being asked to consider a report of the head of finance on the revenue budget and capital programme and make any recommendations to cabinet. We've asked a lot of questions, but I was wondering if committee do have any recommendations, specific recommendations to cabinet. Normally in the course of a discussion I have a whole bunch of bullet points that come out as recommendations, but I haven't. Or are we content to simply note the process? Are we happy with the process and the situation that we're in?
We had a lot of questions around LGR. Does that indicate that the explanation in the budget wasn't thorough enough?
This is an unknown, isn't it?
I think there's so many unknowns with it, isn't there?
Okay.
I just have a hypothetical question, I suppose. Oh, it's very prompting that Nick's just come up large on the screen. Yeah, it scares me, trust me.
Hasn't got his hand up though.
We can't increase the council tax because the government any more than the recommended amount. The government said so. Legally, what would be the challenge if we decided to ignore that and do it anyway, because we are the bottom 15 local authorities?
I'm glad Nick's there.
We've got a really good case for why we needed to do that, and we're not being unreasonable to do that. It's just a hypothetical.
But that's where we need the referendum.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of points to that really. So the first thing is that the government limit is a limit before you need a referendum.
Yeah.
So if we were to put up put it up by £6 or £10 or whatever we want, or put it up to the national average,
Yeah.
we would have to hold a referendum. So Nick's probably gone white at that actually. The fact of the matter is clearly that's another local election, so
Yeah.
that's a 6-figure sum to run a local election. I'm told no one has ever won a referendum on such a thing. I don't know whether they've ever taken place or not, or not.
Once.
Yes,
Was it
well,
It was a PCC in Bedfordshire once won it.
Yeah.
They got an increase above what they were proposing. That's the only time it's ever happened.
I was going to say there's some that have lost, aren't there?
Lots of lost.
And it's not just that cost you'd lose, because you'd obviously have to bill, then rebill. You wouldn't take, it interrupts all your payment times for getting your money in. So that's what basically stops you going through a referendum, other than Nick would just say no, go away, I think probably. The other thing is, because I did look at the guidance around exceptional financial support, and to be blunt, Vale is nowhere near needing exceptional financial support. If I rang up the ministry and said, this is the situation at Vale, what can you do to help me? They'll just say, well, just use they'll tell us just to use your reserves up and call us when you're about to run out. So that is what they would tell us to do. So that they would see us as not having a problem at this stage.
And wait till you're drowning before they.
Presumably, though, as a unitary, all of council tax will be reset when the unitary authorities come in.
Yeah. So the the standard model of doing it is harmonisation. So it's a complex calculation, which I've managed to get my head around when we were doing the process. But effectively, you end up with something called a weighted average, and what that means is that everyone is. No one in the district is paying more than the referendum limit amounts of an increase. So it is harmonised on that level. Now, there are circumstances, Nick might know more about this, but there are circumstances where you can try and argue with the government to get a higher council tax to start with through LGR, but I'm not sure how successful they are. Whenever I've looked at LGR and what it's done to council tax, it's always been within that average bracket. I've never seen that actually happen. Nick may have a comment.
Well, yeah, as I understand it, Chair, through you, the methods are set out under the Local Government Finance Act 1992, which was amended by the Localism Act 2011. One of my favourite sections, section 52ZD, which when you got to ZD in your sections, you know you're in trouble. But it does exactly all the things that Simon's been detailing to you. I'm not aware of any additional legislation which is coming up, or regulations which are coming up around local government reorganisation, but it is referred to that they do intend to do something, but we don't have detail of what it is. The only guidance we got is the one that Simon was just referring to with the weighted average, which will likely be a financially positive one for Vale, but even that is unclear. I think Simon would have to admit that. But there are rules around that. It would need submission through to government, specifically, I think, to the Secretary of State. And there are principles set out in section ZD, which talks about the circumstances in which a particular authority is disadvantaged, or I think is the phrase. I'd have to look it up. But it's a horrible mess. You're not going to get anything changed between now and then. You definitely won't do anything illegal, obviously, which I know was only hypothetically being discussed. But but this is something which is going to have to be picked up really at the stage of LGR and not before. It's the cost of a full election to do it. And I had a quick look. It looks like only one council was ever successful in getting an uplift, and that goes all the way back to something like 2012. So it's rare as hen's teeth, I'm afraid. So thanks for letting me cover a whole bunch of areas there, Chair.
One thing I would point out, of course, is that the unitary is subject to the 4.99% limit on council tax, or the 2.99% we will be
Right.
with. So they will have more opportunity to increase council tax when the authority that comes after us won't be as tightly constrained on council tax as we are.
It's likely that residents will see a fairly big hike in their council tax.
But essentially, as a committee, we're not going to recommend to cabinet that they. Well, in all seriousness, we're not going to. We're not going to recommend a referendum because that does not sound like it would be a sensible recommendation. No. Okay, fine. Any other
Healthy
comments?
to discuss it though.
Yeah, worth discussing. Absolutely.
I'm not sure this is a recommendation because I think probably everything is being done. But it just does strike me that LGR, happening, maybe not happening, not really sure exactly when it's going to happen. Is an uncertainty that is unusual. It's not something that is dealt with normally in the budgeting cycle. And I suppose I just have this sense that, and I suspect officers are doing everything they can, but clearly managing that risk of timing, whether it happens, is critical. And there should be approaches being taken to try and manage that may not be usual processes. And I'm not quite sure what they should be, but that's really my reflection.
I mean, that's very much on SMT's radar, and it's certainly on the cabinet's radar. We are in reality, LGR comes along once every 50 years, probably.
Yeah.
So we are in exceptional times. I think it hasn't helped if you think about the fact we've got LGR, we've just had a fair funding review. There's all sorts of other, there's potential devolution on the table as well. The potential for change has been massive for local government, in those affected areas at the moment. So, and on top of that, lots of the councils that are subject to LGR in a far worse financial position than Vale is. There are, lots of councils already in exceptional financial support, close to it. They may have the same sort of budget gap that we have, but less than half the reserves we've got. So, there's a lot of councils already grappling with significant problems. Then you chuck in fair funding, LGR, devolution on top of all that, and there's a lot going on. So I think SMT and cabinets are well aware that we're in challenging times, and I think the key thing, particularly internally, is just about communicating and just communicating the fact that we're in turbulent times and we don't know what the direction of travel is. I mean, the key thing I would say on LGR is there's been no indication from government that they want to take their foot off the pedal on LGR. There's other things that I think they may well do. We've seen delays in some of the other programs of LGR type work in other areas. I think they will try and get LGR over the line for April 28 because it's not their end goal. It's their first step. And they can't get to their end goal without this being in place. So that's what I think will mean. That's why I think it will happen. But what my suspicion is that what will happen is that we may find their end of the timeline gets delayed, but they won't change ours, because that's what happened in the first stage.
You haven't got a recommendation, but Councillor Potter's recognising the background that the budget has been set in is kind of noting rather than a recommendation to cabinet. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's what I was going to sum up really and say. I think as a committee, our sense of unease. I think we're confident that our sense of unease is shared by cabinet and senior officers, because it's a real moment of transition and uncertainty, and that I think as a committee are we therefore confident that cabinet and senior officers are doing all they can at this point, given the levels of uncertainty that we're looking at, I think. So
Yes, just I think so, and I also would be very reluctant to put any more effort into it at the moment, because I think it could well easily be wasted effort. So
okay. So in that case, I think we'll thank Simon and your team. Clearly, this is always a very long and time-consuming process, but at the moment there's an extra factors. So yeah, thank you ever so much, and Mark as well. Thank you for all your work. Okay. Close the meeting then. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Well done. Profit.